Will you please be seated so that we could start? We are already 2 minutes late. So, welcome everybody to our afternoon session. My name is Astrid Kleist and I'm the Vice President of Central Western Europe. And to this afternoon we are looking forward to receive another 2 greetings from our ecumenical brothers and sisters, brothers in this case, and to receive the report of the General Secretary and the budget presentation. So it's quite a program, and we will start, and I would like to invite Canon Junge from the Anglican Communion to present his greetings. A very warm welcome to you.
How's that? It's my great joy this afternoon to bring greetings from the Secretary General of the Anglican Communion, who is Archbishop Josiah Idio-Firon, a fellow Nigerian. He writes, "Dear Archbishop Musa, officers, members of the Lutheran World Federation Council, and dear Martin, my esteemed colleague, and your staff in Geneva and around the world. The churches of the Anglican Communion send you greetings and prayers at the beginning of this meeting of the Lutheran World Federation Council as you look forward to the future. Looking to the recent past, the Anglican Communion rejoices with you in the events from 2016 to 2017 that commemorated the Reformation anniversary, and how you transformed a pivotal event in the past into a springboard into the future in terms of the unity and mission of the Church. It was our joy to be part of that commemoration through our own adherence to the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification. By the resolution of the Anglican Consultative Council in 2016, Anglicans welcomed and affirmed the substance of the JDDJ. Anglicans rejoiced that the Archbishop of Canterbury formally presented the resolution to you and to the representatives of the Catholic Church, in the presence of the General Secretaries of the World Methodist Council and the World Communion of Reformed Churches at Westminster Abbey on the 31st of October 2017. We look forward in the coming years to exploring the implications of our common adherence to the JDDJ for our journey together in ever-deepening communion and mission. The Anglican Communion is eager to work together with the LWF to encourage our churches to receive the fruits of our many years of bilateral dialogue together at the regional and local levels, and to work together in mission and witness as an integral way of walking together even further on the way that leads to unity to which Christ leads. Yours in the risen Christ, Josiah."
Thank you very much, dear Canon. You already pointed it out that, as you know, the LWF and the Anglican Communion intend to establish a new instrument to promote and monitor Anglican-Lutheran relations around the world. And in the future, it will be called Alicum. We will hear more about it later on. And we are looking forward to this new intensifying instrument, and that it will lead to even more understanding and to even more heartly brotherhood than it's already today. So thank you very much for coming, and we're looking forward to this new project. So now we come to one of
The next greeting.
the next greeting. That's right.
Yeah, the next greeting.
We have another greeting, Mr. Reverend Dr. Hans Lessing from the World Communion of Reformed Churches. Give him a big hand.
Thank you very much indeed. And I bring greetings from the President of the World Communion of Reformed Churches, Reverend Najla Kassab, from the National Evangelical Synod in Lebanon and Syria, and from our General Secretary, Chris Ferguson, who would both like to be here to foster the contact, but sent me instead, and I'm new in my position. I only started my work as Executive Secretary for Communion and Theology at the beginning of the year, and perhaps I should share with you that I'm coming from one of the United Churches in Germany, which are strongly shaped by Lutheran and Reformed traditions in a way that brings us together to be a church of the gospel, an evangelical church in the biblical sense. The Lutheran Church is a very strong component in my own biography. I've worked for almost 10 years in a Lutheran church in Namibia, and my wife is now working in Zimbabwe, attached to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Zimbabwe. So there is quite a Lutheran connection. Dear sisters and brothers, to be Lutheran is to be ecumenical. With this statement begins the draft of the Lutheran World Federation's commitments to the way to ecclesial communion, which you will discuss during this council meeting. To be reformed is to be ecumenical. Our communion has stated in many policy documents. And I think it's quite remarkable that 500 years after the Reformation, two communions that used to be rather known, or we could also say a bit notorious, for the fierce defense of their doctrinal integrity, are now defining their theological identity with reference to ecumenical openness. That, as you put it in the foreword of the quoted document, as being lived out in dialogue, in common witness through diaconical service and advocacy, through common prayer, and in shared spiritual life. The theme that you chose for this council meeting expresses this universal nature of God's grace. Freely you have received, freely give. The ecclesial communion that we aspire in our ecumenical endeavors is God's gift, as the President said earlier in his report. This divine present commits us to share what we have received. This council meeting takes place close to the first anniversary of the Wittenberg Witness, which has been signed by our two communions last year during a ceremony in the context of the WCRC's General Council in Wittenberg. And this document rejoices in the unity led by the Holy Spirit that we are already experiencing. On the foundation of this witness calls for increased efforts to embody this unity, together resisting the forces of injustice and exclusion. And the process that started with the signing of the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification by the Roman Catholic Church and by the Lutheran World Federation in Augsburg is moving, I think, in a similar direction. In associating with the original document, the World Methodist Council and the World Communion of Reformed Churches have joined in this journey that was started by Lutheran and Catholics. The Anglican Communion, as we just have heard, has welcomed and affirmed the substance of the consensus. And the 5 communions are now searching for adequate language that can describe the state of the ecclesial unity which has already been achieved in the consensus on a once controversial topic for means to express it in the life of the churches. So we have achieved something. What is it? What does it mean? What strength does it have to really lead us forward into a future which will be a joint future where we are closer together? After more than 60 years of ecumenical engagement, the LWF and the WCRC have much to celebrate. There are many examples where Lutheran and Reformed churches have already declared ecclesial communion. And in the Wittenberg Witness, our two communions have committed themselves to respond to the yearning of our broken and fragmented world with common actions ever more seriously. At several occasions, representatives of our two communions have called for visible signs that embrace the unity that we share. The dialogue report with the name Communion on Being the Church that has been published in 2014 gives some direction. It calls for the confirmation of the theological consensus reached in the dialogue by granting pulpit and table fellowship, recognizing each other's ministry and acknowledging each other's ordination, and by committing to common witness and service in the world. It also asks the two communions to work together more closely as institutions, and I think here we are very much on the way already, in a very good way. We are collaborating in programs like the new International Financial and Economic Architecture, NIFEA, and have talked about the possibility of holding governance meetings in close proximity. We have talked. I know there is no decision. Encouraged by the Wittenberg Witness, we should now take up this agenda even more seriously. In suggesting this, we are aware that not everything will be easy to achieve. That is why the Wittenberg Witness prays for renewed imagination. We all agree that unity is not equivalent to uniformity. But on our common journey, we have learned that unity in diversity needs expression in visible signs and common witness. On this journey, we are in need of God's guidance. As the Wittenberg puts it, and it concludes with a prayer, together we pray that the Holy Spirit may give us courage and imagination faithfully to live out our commitment to unity, expressed in shared worship, witness, and work in the world. We pray for liberation in the wider world and, by God's grace, a thoroughgoing renewal and reformation of our churches. God bless you in Christ. Signed by the General Secretary, Chris Ferguson. I thank you.
I want to thank you. Thank you very much. Are you going to give us the tablet now?
Yeah.
My pleasure.
You hand over the tablet.
Dear Reverend Lessing, thank you very much for your blessing. I'm happy to hear that you consider yourself and us as being ecumenical and that we can be close and different altogether. And once John F. Kennedy, as an American, said these legendary words in Berlin, I am a Berliner. And so I would like to say, I am reformed. Thank you. So now we come to agenda item 10, to the report of the General Secretary. And I would like to you to view to exhibit number 10. Exhibit number 10 and its annexes. And I would like to remind you that it has become customary in the LWF that apart from the President's address, which is delivered at the moment, the exhibits are not read out briefly, but they're going to be presented. So it'll be different than what you can read in your exhibits, so that saves us time and it gives us space for interaction, which is really good for us to get more into talks. So now, dear General Secretary, we are very much looking forward to your report.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And as the Vice President, President Kleist, has said, I won't read, yet I hope I won't say things that are too different from what is inside the report, because it should reflect. I'm just going to give some pointers as to what is written in my report otherwise. First of all, let me say how grateful and how happy we are as staff in the Communion Office that we are having our first council meeting with you. You are most welcome, and we are always mindful and grateful for the fact that each of you is setting aside time and offering talents in order to give them to our common journey as a communion of churches. I couldn't think of any of you back in your respective churches and countries just sitting around and waiting for something to happen in your lives. We know that your lives are full, and we know that your ministries in the church, be it ordained or be it also as laypersons, is a ministry which is demanding, where churches are asking a lot from each of us, and yet you are setting time apart, time aside to be here and to support our common calling, which is to express and to embrace a journey into which we have been called, which is the journey of the communion. So with that word of gratitude, we welcome you in Geneva, we welcome you at the Communion Office, at the Ecumenical Center, and we look forward to the days of work that we have ahead of us. I begin my report just reminding us that Council is an expression of both, of course, of governance, because you have governance responsibilities. We talked yesterday in the induction process about it. But I want us also to be mindful all the time that beyond the governance dimension, the Council is in itself an expression of the communion, particularly in between the assemblies. There is a legal side of the issues, or let's say an organizational side, governance to the LWF. But we hold it together with that other dimension of being an expression, the deepest and the widest expression of the communion in between assemblies. It is in this way that we want to continue engaging. And finally, also to pledge from our side as Communion Office and from my side as the General Secretary that we are looking towards building and nurturing relationships of trust and of accountability. We want to continue working for the years that are ahead of us until the next assembly in those relationships of trust and accountability, and what is from our side, we want to do our best to be able to nurture and to express that relationship. My first slide, or my second slide if you want so, relates to the first item in my report, which looks back to the assembly. And we in the Communion Office have been reflecting a lot about the outcome of the assembly, the resolutions, the statements, the message, and how we take that further in view of the work that is ahead of us. We have been saying that for us, the assembly outcome is not something that you take one-to-one, but that the assembly outcome and the assembly was a space for the communion to speak its mind. It was a moment to come together and to articulate a common voice within some very few days, pointing at commitments, pointing at items and issues that are important for Lutherans when they come together at a global level. This is how we read it. And therefore we took the 26 resolutions, we took the assembly statements, we took the assembly message, and we looked into what do we do with this now, wanting to be faithful stewards to what the assembly has spoken for us and into the world. And we have taken 3 steps. First of all, immediately accommodating some of those directions that we're giving into concrete actions. There were items which didn't have to wait for a next year or for a new program, but these were actions we could immediately implement to express solidarity with those churches living in difficult contexts, for instance, or to embark in furthering our journey in view of theological education and formation. We have also been working towards looking into launching new initiatives, preparing the ground in view of what we may begin to do in a stronger and more consistent way as of next year. And indeed, we looked also into the assembly outcome in view of its implications for the strategy and the strategy development, that document which you will be looking at during the next session. So these are the 3 tracks into which what the assembly spoke, what the assembly saw as joint commitments have been processed further. My next slide speaks about the strategy, although I will only speak briefly to it because there is a whole session afterwards where we will go deeper into the strategy as it is. This is a picture from a big celebration of the Reformation anniversary in the Mekane Jesus Church in Ethiopia, where our president, together with the vice president and our area secretary, attended. Just briefly, what is the strategy in the life of a communion of churches? I think we want to be very careful in theologically understanding also what a strategy can be and what it can't be in the life of a communion of churches. We have defined it as a document that is going to help us in view of articulating our common purpose, a sense of direction, and the focus of what we will be doing together as a communion of churches. The preparation of, or the development of strategy for a communion of 145 churches living in 98 countries in the world is in itself a complex process, because there are many different contexts impelling or compelling churches to look at very different things. And yet, we are saying here that this is a strategy of what LWF member churches, as a communion of churches, are looking at doing together. The word together is the big word that we are saying here. Despite all the specific ministries and mission endeavors that your churches are undertaking locally, the challenges you need to be responding to, our member churches have come together to say there are certain things next to what we do on the ground, which we will be doing together as a global communion, which also has to happen in a way or another on the ground. The second important item that we had strongly in our mind while developing the strategy is that we don't need to reinvent. We don't need to think of the LWF as if it is beginning its journey today or next year. There is a trajectory. There are commitments which are historic commitments. Yesterday in the induction process, in our induction sessions, we spoke about the foundational pillars of the LWF, what nurtures the vocation of this communion. That's there, and we cannot undo it, and we cannot disregard it. So we looked into a way of balancing the continuity of what the LWF has been and is today, and innovation, what it is going to do, where it is going to grow further, what are the next steps which the communion is envisaging as it looks ahead. And then in my report, I'm speaking of the milestones that of this, the approval of the strategy of being a milestone, but which would require follow-up. And that follow-up we are seeing in 3 different dimensions. First of all, we will say and speak to that later on, we are only bringing the new strategy to this council. We are not yet bringing programs and a budget that would be aligned to this new strategy, because one step has to follow the other. We cannot come with a whole package, assuming that the strategy is going to be adopted as it is, but we want to first take that first step, which is approving the strategy. So what needs to happen afterwards is, on the one hand, we need to go back to our program plans, to how we will be able to express what we are committing to do together, which was your question, Ranjita, to the President this morning. That is the question. So in view of what we are reading here, what is it that we are going to do? Where is it that we want to find the resources, the time, the space, so that we can work together on what we are committing to do together? And here, I believe we are not looking all throughout to business as usual. We are looking particularly also for what we need to do new or different in the time to come. The second aspect which we have to look at is how to best set up our office, our programs, but then also the structure of the office in view of what we want to be doing together and what we want to facilitate as a communion office in this world. And thirdly, we will mail the strategy to the member churches. And this time, different to what we did last year or last time, we will send the strategy with a question to our 145 member churches. And the question is going to be, where do you see your church coming in? Where do you see your church contributing to what we are saying we want to be doing together in this world, to what we want to be together in this world? Here too, I hope, although an LWF strategy does not supersede a local strategy of a church, here too, I hope that there will be openness to receive the impulses of what we say as a global communion of churches and how that may affect or influence what we do locally as churches. My next slide, or my next point in my report, relates to both the assessment of the location and, in more particular ways, to the development also of the property of the ecumenical center. Here you see how it would look like. There is a building which fell outside the slide, but there is still another building. But let's not worry about it, because in my report, the buildings that are being referenced to are the A and the B building. The A building is the one where we are sitting right now, which would get a 3rd floor up there. But that's as high as it can go. And I'm saying in my report that in view of space limitation and how we would be packed there, and in view also of the assessment of the location process, we have given a signal to the WCC that when it comes to the A building, they shouldn't consider the LWF, but if, and depending on the decisions of the council, we would then rather look for a B building facilities there, which are connected to the chapel, to this place, and others. I'm referring in my report then also to the assessment process and the session which we will have tomorrow about that. Steps have been undertaken. In my report, I speak about the appointment by the meeting of officers of a task force and the work that has been done thus far. Tomorrow, the discussion is going to take place in a confidential session. You took some actions during this morning in the opening session. What I personally hope to be an outcome of the sessions and discussions tomorrow is a thorough and deep understanding by the Council in view of how we have to take up and deal with these questions. I hope that the task force report is providing that basis for the Council to be helped to understand why we are taking up this question. My second expectation for the discussions tomorrow is that the Council will give us a sense of direction, give the task force a sense of direction in view of where to possibly further explore and dig deeper in view of the options, theoretical options that are being presented. My next slide is a slide that you know already, but I will play it anyway again. Most of you were at the assembly, and I think most of you will remember both the song, but then also the image, which is an image which we have continued to use as we reflect about the communion. I believe this is a very powerful metaphor to what the LWF is all about. Member churches holding their distinctive bell in their hand, playing their unique melody because of where they are and who they are, and bringing those bells to play a tune which they play together in this world. Nobody is telling you, change your bell. Bring your bell to our shared journey of communion and bring it and offer it in view of what we aim to develop as our common tune in the LWF. There are several references in my report to communion, and that tension of communion being a gift and being a task, a communion something to be stewarded, but then also the whole reference of the communion as something which we are and something into which we are asked and invited to become every day anew. It is not a static concept. It's like baptism, into which you are supposed to go back daily in order to grow and continue being immersed in. I'm making a plea in my report that when it comes to the LWF and the journey of communion, we continue to look at our journey as a communion with a sense of both honesty and gratitude. Honesty, because we know where we are not yet there. We know where we are struggling. We know what we still need to find out. And it is good that we are able to identify it together. Because the moment we are recognizing this, it becomes our collective and shared task. But yet at the same time, by being honest, let's not forget to be grateful also, because of how many stages and how deep our journey has gone thus far. I'm speaking in my report about the exploration of a possible name change, which is one of the resolutions, and I'm making a plea in my report that we should look at the theological questions that are linked to that possible name change. It shouldn't be just an action about taking one name out of the Constitution and replacing it by another. We should sit down and discuss together, what does it mean? What are we committing to in view of going for a possible name change. What would it mean in view of what we expect from each other as LWF member churches? What would it mean in view of how we are going to deal with difference? What does it mean in view of what the authority of what this council decides means for the life of the church on the ground? These are questions unresolved which needs to be asked. My next slide speaks about a whole chapter I'm devoting to the whole context in which we live as LWF. I'm speaking of the LWF living, or the churches altogether, living in times of convoluted times, in times which are complex in many respects. And here then addressing the question as to what church do we want to be in the midst of this context, and what communion do we want to be in that one. We have accompanied churches all over the globe, finding it difficult to relate to the polarization in their own context, finding it difficult to speak, to offer a word out of the gospel in view of realities that people are living. We have also been seeing churches that so easily get trapped by the trap of identity politics and then become part of systems that exclude, that oppress, and that are not inviting and inclusive as the gospel is calling us to be and inviting us to be. I'm speaking about faith having a perspective into the future. Faith inviting us to look into the present, not with an eye on how things have always been, but with an eye on how things are going to be because of the promise of the kingdom of God. I'm ironically saying, the Lord taught us to pray, your kingdom, thy kingdom come, and not thy past be restored. And that is the perspective of the gospel. I'm moving. We move on with the slide on churches living in context of violence. I don't want to speak much more to this. I think how the LWF president presented it in view of the challenges the church is facing in Nigeria was eloquent enough. I want to refer to the LWF Peace Messengers Training, a publication which is out there, which is very recommendable. In that publication, you get strong resources, churches get strong resources about addressing conflict within and outside the church. I would very much want to commend to look into that one. We move on. The next slide refers to a paragraph in my report where I'm speaking about the growing consensus in the world, in society, that sexual violence affecting women is unacceptable and that we cannot no longer tolerate violence against that one, against women. So, and I'm asking the question and I'm saluting the fact that churches are not exempted from that one. Actually, churches are expected to lead such consensus so that this is not going to happen. LWF has a trajectory to build on, and I'm referring to the LWF's Code of Conduct, which is offered, which we are planning to offer to LWF member churches so that a tool is offered how churches can address questions of sexual violence happening within and outside the context of the church. I'm also speaking to something which yesterday was mentioned in our induction process already. Women's empowerment has brought us to a point where it could bring us. The next step, the needed step, is men's emancipation in order to achieve and to find just relationships between women and men. And this is set in an assembly resolution, and we need to move to that context as well. The next slide speaks about women's ordination. There is a chapter a paragraph in my report speaking about women's ordination. This picture is a picture from Wittenberg last year, bringing history and present beautifully together, where female ordained pastors were gathering globally and celebrating women's ordination in the context of the Reformation anniversary. I'm making a reference that we should not use the Bible to exclude others. Apartheid has been explained with a Bible verse. Slavery has been explained with Bible verses. Colonialism has been explained with Bible verses. We need to be very mindful as Lutherans that we hold in Christ the myth of our hermeneutics when it comes to reading the Bible. LWF is known for a commitment to full inclusion of women, and the Assembly has reaffirmed that commitment. There is no way back, and there is no way to renegotiate. The Assembly has said where we want to continue journeying and doing this together. The next slide speaks about the church of tomorrow and the youth of today. I'm making reference in my report how important it would be to connect the whole quest and the resolution of the Assembly about the revival of the church with the inclusion of young people. We should reflect with young people about the present and the future of the church. Otherwise, how will there ever be ownership about the church we are envisioning for the future? My next slide speaks about some new initiatives which we are envisaging. We want to go deeper into an engagement for climate justice. We want to further develop, as the Assembly called for, bringing together our resources and our capacities around theological education and formation, and we want to jointly articulate our Lutheran identity within a global perspective. There is no one center able to tell another center of the communion what Lutheran identity is all about. We will only be able to find it out together. And this is a process which we are envisaging to have. I'm speaking about the strong dynamism in ecumenical relations. That picture was taken last week with Pope Francis visiting the Ecumenical Center. We are following up, as it has been said in different ecumenical greetings, on Lund and Malmö, on the joint commemoration, on the Wittenberg Witness, as just highlighted, and on the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification as a multilateral agreement. My next slide speaks to intra-Lutheran dialogue, where we have faced difficulties. It is a dialogue which has been important for the LWF, an annual meeting between the International Lutheran Council and the LWF. Unfortunately, the positive atmosphere of meetings was increasingly not matched by actions and attitudes outside the meeting. And that cannot happen, that what happens in the meeting doesn't happen outside and vice versa. After careful discussions and several approaches, we eventually decided to give us a pause and to redefine the nature of our engagement with ILC for the years ahead. The dialogues are suspended until the second half of next year, while we find out what this is all about and where it should take us. The next slide is about our living for others. And just to highlight the biblical reference of the Transfiguration of the Lord, which I'm making in my report, seeing the transfigured Lord on the top of the mountain doesn't keep us at the mountain. Jesus wants the disciples to go down to the valleys and to meet the transfigured faces of the people who are falling into the fire, as the Bible says. That's the room where the Christian existence moves, between transfiguration, seeing Christ, and seeing the transfigured faces of the people on the ground. LWF is serving more than 3 million people today. We are improving relationships with member churches on the ground. I'm happy to give that report here. Much more is to be done, but we are moving in the right direction. We are helping, bringing the voice from the ground to the global floor and contributing to the development of the Global Compact for Refugees directly by having given a seed to develop it together. The next and foremost last slide is the spoke in the wheel, which is my last chapter or paragraph in my report, where we are saying that LWF continues to grow and to grow and to grow in its diaconal response in view of particular refugee situations. And at the same time, we see that there are systems which are not working, which would be able to prevent many of those situations. The picture shows the empty seats of the UN Security Council. And I think if these seats remain empty, the world would be in a much worse place than it is today. At the same time, that system needs to be improved. And in my report, I'm making specific proposals to that. Finally, I'm ending my report with a reference to a saying which many of you may know. We don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And it is with this sense of confidence, with this sense of hope, it is with this sense of encouragement out of faith that we are asked, invited to journey together as a communion of churches. My words of thanks to the President for accompaniment and support, to the Executive Committee, and particularly also to my staff colleagues who have been working together in order to express with you the journey of the communion of churches. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Secretary, for your passionate and motivating report. So now we want you to split into table groups to discuss what you've heard, and I would like you to give afterwards concise responses that allows us to share what you are going to be talking about. So now we hear the questions you may discuss about.
The questions are on the slide, which is the next one. There it is. And then let them. What do you affirm? I mean, maybe you read it.
What do you affirm from the General Secretary's report? And the second question is, where do you have questions or concerns? So we will just do it like yesterday afternoon. You will just, the first row will just turn around and discuss together with the second row, and the third row will discuss with the fourth row, and so on. So you have now time to intensify these two questions. 10 minutes. So please let us come together in plenary and share. Yeah, and turn around again so that the groups can share their responses. So it's two. Are you not? You still need more time. So
They need more time.
you need more time. Could you give me a sign?
5 minutes.
Another 5 minutes? Raise your hand if you would like another 5 minutes to discuss.
No. Yes. Yes, there are some
Yeah?
groups.
Okay, then we give you another 5 minutes. One more minute. So, dear brothers and sisters, I would now like you to turn around again and to share your responses in the plenary. So now let's talk about question number 1 first.
Vielleicht bringen Sie es zusammen. Affirmation
Nee.
question.
No. So what do you affirm from the General Secretary's report? Who would like to start and give some insight? What do you affirm?
Thank you. Minna Hetemäki, Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. We had a complex of affirmations and concerns, not concerns about the report as such, but of the issues dealt with. We started by discussing the more disruptive developments among churches identifying themselves as Lutheran, so what you were talking about, ILC, connected that to the need of theological education and how powerful of a tool theological education can be in informing our thinking and identities. We also touch upon the plans for this project on Lutheran identity, or Lutheran identities maybe in plural. I wanted to affirm that. And also the connection between theological education and other topics important to us, such as climate change and kind of situating ourselves within the creation. Do you have something else? Thank you.
So I think we should follow your example and just mix the two discussion questions, so that I just collect responses and then give the General Secretary the chance to respond. So please.
I'm Veiko from Namibia, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Namibia. We, in our group, discussed the importance of holding tension between the past and the future. As pointed out by the General Secretary, that we don't need to completely put all our efforts in what used to be the LWF in the past. Neither do we need to jump and just become futuristics, but we need to keep this intention because this is also what we are learning from Reformation. It's a continuous process. It does not need to have an end somewhere and another beginning. So we affirm that what the Secretary General has said.
Thank you very much. Affirmations or concerns? Take the chance. Lasse?
Lasse Schmidt-Klee, Evangelical Lutheran Church of Hanover. In our group, we also talked about harvesting the fruits of the assembly, and we endorse that you put a focus in your report on this issue. I think we all want to look forward, but it's also very important for us to look back. And we had just this great Reformation Day last year in Namibia, and we should also take time to look back and to give this an opportunity for us to think for the future perspective of this event. We also talked about the relations between the International Lutheran Council and the LWF, and we want to ask the question under which conditions can these talks start again? What do you think are the conditions, the circumstances that will make it possible to reopen the conversation?
Thank you. Would you like to comment on the responses so far?
Thank you. Some of it I understand were comments affirming the importance of theological education in view of the many challenges in the world, and I think that's what the Assembly said very clearly. A powerful tool to address questions of peace and violence, a question of how we live together, populism, and all these things going on, it is theological education. So there is no doubt in it. Thank you for the comment on Lutheran identities, whether it is something we want to continue looking at as the one identity, or whether we want to be inclusive of recognizing and acknowledging how identities have also developed in different ways, why we are a communion of churches. That's, I think, a very important input, which I'm asking my colleagues to take note of as well. Continuity and innovation, I think it was a comment. When it comes to ILC and LWF and under which conditions the annual interaction could be resumed, I think what we have been asking is the ball is rather on the other court at this point of time. We are asking the question, how do you understand this interaction? What do you want to get out of it in view of wanting to meet with the LWF once a year? I want to reiterate how important these meetings have been in the past. They were deteriorating for reasons which I'm not fully recognizing. And a point has come where you cannot allow a global platform of dialogues to become a fig tree of things happening which you are not able to address. And that is, I think, the difficulty which we are looking at. And in this regard, I'm intending to continue being in dialogue also with the chairperson of the ILC to hear how that process is going internally. I believe many of the decisions that the ILC will be able to take as a global Lutheran organization will depend on what the LCMS, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the decisions it may be taking in July 2019 when they have their own assembly. So that's the reason why we have postponed everything until after, because I believe ILC can only move in a certain way, and it will very much depend on what that assembly of the LCMS will say, for instance, in view of double membership in both the ILC and the LWF. Globally, at a global level in 2013, we have publicly stated that we see a potential in that one. I know that there is no unanimity in this House in view of whether it is such a potential or whether it is a problem. The LWF globally has said it's not a problem if people churches may function as a bridge between these two realities. If now churches are going to be invited to disaffiliate from the LWF, as it is intended to happen, then of course the basis of what we are doing is fundamentally put into question. And until that decision is not clear, we don't see purpose in having a dialogue right now.
Any further questions or concerns? Yes, please.
Jerzy Sojka, Lutheran Church of Augsburg Confession in Poland. Our group started with the topic of communion, and we would like to affirm that way of thinking in which this name-changing thing is not only an issue of technicality, but it's also a theological issue. It is really important to discriminate this very complex issue, but we would like also add something. We need also reconsider our practical tools, how we live in that communion also as churches, because on the table were some examples of situation in which we don't see the responsibility on the side of the member churches
of being in the communion. Yeah? Sometimes, to put it maybe too hard, but sometimes, for example, that was also a topic during the induction yesterday, that sometimes being a member of the council is only a tool of inner church politics for the church, and there's nothing to do with being in the communion. Yeah? And there's also the issues of communication. It's really, really very complex thing, and it is really good to start with theology, but we need then translate it into life very, very practically. And another thing is youth participation, as affirmation, but also as challenge for the churches. And two other questions. In the report on this written version, on the page 9 is an invitation to the council to prepare a word of encouragement for the churches, and our proposal is to pass this task to the Committee of Advocacy and Public Voice to prepare such a project to may go further with that as the council. And another questions on the page 11, there is a concept of 5 gradual stages of participation in the LWF. Can you say anything more about it, because it is unclear for us what does it exactly mean?
Thank you very much. I think you should comment directly.
In my report, when I come to the questions about what would it mean to change the name from, to adopt the name or the word communion in our name, the first question I'm asking is about mutual expectations. And I think that goes very much in line with what you are saying. I believe that we need to spell out, if we would do something like this, we need to spell out what do we expect from each other. Where can we call upon each other? And I hope we won't become legalistic about it and very casuistic about trying to define all possible situations. But some basic situations, some basic outlines as to what do we expect from each other as churches witnessing on the ground contextually, yet at the same time bound together as a communion. So next, I would very much agree with what you say. Next to the theological work, there is a very practical work to do in view of spelling out, naming the expectations, and developing the instruments to call upon each other in view of those expectations which we have outlined somewhere. Youth participation and the 5 stages of participation. I can ask my colleagues to make copies, which we could just share with some of you. What I have seen is that some churches really want to include young people, but they don't know from where to begin because there are different stages. Sometimes there are structures there already, sometimes not even structures are there. So if there is no structure even, if there is no contact point, why would you begin to discuss quota? It doesn't make sense. You need to be building gradually on increasing and furthering that participation. And I think this is what we are looking at. In view of your word about encouragement to churches, there are 2 proposals, I think, where I'm asking the Council to consider speaking. The Committee for Advocacy and Public Voice is listening, and they will bring tomorrow morning, they will bring back to you what they are considering to develop as statements, public statements by the Council. If you don't see that there, you may then raise your hand again.
Do you agree to that? Is that?
Yeah, and please still this question about this 5th gradual participation concept on the page 11.
Well, I tried to say something about it. There is, I was not clear. There is, I don't want to go into the details now. There are some churches where the first step will probably be to look out for the churches, for the youth, and to see how to offer a space, a platform, a coordination where they can be. There are other churches who have that in place already, who may be thinking about, well, how do we begin to bind them into governance, into decision-making, and so on. So these are the 5 stages. I don't have them here. I can share them with you if you are interested, so that we substantiate what we are talking about.
So last calls. Yeah.
Elita from Zimbabwe. In our group, we concern about ecumenical relationship, that there are quite a very important relationship agreement or activities being done. But our concern is on how can this information translated to member churches up to grassroots, because it seems like it's happening on the higher level, but on the grassroots, there's nothing happening or any information received.
Any other requests, concerns, affirmations? Otherwise, I would just like you now to comment on the last concern, and then we would finish.
Thank you very much for that question. And indeed, that has been a permanent question of the whole ecumenical movement, but also ours as LWF. We have had cases where ecumenical agreements at the global level, they got quite powerful traction on the ground, particularly where it was relevant. If I think of the Mennonite action, which got very strong traction in those countries where Mennonites and Lutherans were living together. So, people embraced it. I believe also with the joint commemoration with the joint commemoration of the Reformation anniversary from conflict to communion, that got some traction at different levels. I believe at the same time, and we are discussing this among ourselves, that the question you are alluding to is the whole famous discussion about reception of ecumenical dialogues, reception of results. We want to be more intentional in that one, sharing and hopefully also equipping churches to embrace and take up what has been developed. Yet at the same time, I'm becoming more and more aware that also the ecumenical movement and the global dialogue, the global ecumenical dialogues, they need to become themselves also more receptive as to what are the ecumenical realities on the ground that require a theological response. So sometimes there is that mismatch also, that what is being developed and discussed is not necessarily something which is the big question on the ground. So how do we develop that in a stronger way? And in this regard, I'm very happy about a document which hopefully this council will be approving, which is the ecumenical commitments, which is trying to help us to turn a bit our view into holding these two realities, global and local, better together. But it is acknowledged, it is a problem, and we are not where we should be and wanted to be when it comes to make the global agreements to become a tangible reality on the grounds, not all over the place.
So before we take the recommended action, I would like to give you some more information, and I now refer to Exhibit 10.1. Exhibit 10.1 of the LWF Strategic Priority Areas for 2017. This will be discussed in the respective committees, not here, but then. And I want to remind you that the following exhibits listed under the General Secretary report will also be discussed in the Committee for Theology and Public Witness in order to bring concrete recommendations to the Council. So that responds to Annex 2 to the Lutheran Orthodox Statement, to Annex 3 to the Lutheran Mennonite Roman Catholic Report, and to Annex 4, the LWF Ecumenical Commitment and Guidelines, so that you know that they're not forgotten, but they will be discussed within the committees. And before we are going into the budget presentation, I want now to proceed to take the recommended action as per the annotated agenda, and I refer to the annotation under item 10 on page 8. Item 10, page 8, and I will read it out loud. It is recommended to receive the report of the General Secretary with appreciation and refer relevant matters arising from it to the committees for discussion and appropriate action. Is anybody in the Council willing to move?
Bernd Oberdorfer, Church of Bavaria.
And who endorse it?
Lasse Schmidt-Klee, Church of Hanover.
So, any further discussions? Then I would like to proceed to take the vote. Who's in favor? Who's against it? Any abstentions? Well done. It's
Unanimously.
Unanimously. What were you? Was that an abstention? No. So don't confuse me, Mr. President.
He's the one still raising green.
He's raising green. That green is in favor. So thank you very much, and once again, give him a hand. And now have a look at exhibit number 11. The budget is presented at this session, but this is some more information for you. The budget and the program budget overview will be discussed at the committees. So the recommendation